Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. In 1983, in Alaska, USA, there was a two-faced serial killer. By day he baked bread, living a quiet life. At night he'd fly his plane to hunt sex workers. After assaulting and torturing them, he'd make them run naked, while he sniped at them from behind. Over 12 years, he committed more than 30 offenses, shocking the entire United States. He was ultimately sentenced to 461 years in prison. He is the Butcher Baker. So what exactly happened back then? Let's first travel back to 20th century America to understand the details of the case. When you think of Alaska, many people's first thought is the sled dog, the Alaskan Malamute. That's right. This long-haired sled dog originates from the extremely cold state of Alaska. Alaska is located in the northwest corner of the North American continent and is the largest state in the U.S. by area. It's at a high latitude and is covered in ice and snow year-round. Even in the warmest southern region, Anchorage, the highest year-round temperature is only in the 50s or 60s Fahrenheit. It's worth mentioning that Anchorage has the highest crime rate in the nation. According to the 2021 FBI crime report, there are nearly 200 violent crimes per 100,000 people. The sexual assault rate is also consistently high. But the story we're telling today begins far from Anchorage, in the state of Iowa. Let's start there. Robert Hansen was born in 1939 in Iowa to a Danish immigrant family. His father was a baker who supported the family with a bakery. He was an extremely strict and harsh man, who was very severe with Hansen from a young age. The slightest displeasure meant a beating with a rolling pin. Hansen was naturally left-handed, which shouldn't have been an issue, but his father thought it was. He forced him to write with his right hand. If he couldn't hold his knife and fork steady while eating, he'd get a beating. Young Hansen was also required to work in his father's bakery, working all day long. His daily wage was a pitiful 40 cents. Growing up in such a high-pressure family environment, Hansen developed a timid, cautious personality. Besides being extremely withdrawn, he also developed a stutter. After starting school, Hansen's situation didn't improve. As a teenager, Hansen suffered from severe acne. Coupled with his insecurity and timidity, he was bullied quite a bit at school. Many female classmates openly mocked him, calling him a toad. They avoided him like the plague. Young Hansen was completely ostracized, let alone able to pursue any girl he liked. Seeing other classmates going out on dates in pairs, he felt very envious. When he finally managed to talk to a girl, his stuttering completely shattered the courage he had just mustered. During adolescence, active sexual desire and extreme low self-esteem weighed heavily on Hansen's mind. Perhaps it was from this time that Hansen began to harbor resentment towards all women. In high school, because of the heavy work at the bakery and different religious beliefs, he didn't fit in with his classmates. Poverty and low self-esteem also prevented him from joining various choirs or sports clubs. In class, Hansen was an invisible figure. Even at graduation, his name was misspelled in the yearbook. Hansen hated school, hated his classmates, and hated women. His lonely situation led Hansen to take up hunting. After all, hunting didn't require talking to people. He had a natural talent for it. After some practice, his marksmanship and skills improved rapidly. He often had successful hunts. Perhaps influenced by his father's tyranny, Hansen's mind gradually began to twist. Hunting, to earn pocket money, was no longer his only goal. He began to enjoy the thrill of dominating his prey, making it impossible for them to escape. A strong sadistic streak. In his mind, a crazy plan for revenge was slowly forming. In 1957, Hansen joined the U.S. Army Reserve. He was discharged after 1 year of service. That same year, lured by a sex worker, he had his first sexual experience. From then on, he became addicted and couldn't stop. Thanks to his military experience, he was hired in Pocahontas, Iowa, at a police academy as an assistant instructor for police recruits. Here, he met a young woman and married her. In 1960, Hansen also applied to be a volunteer firefighter. It seemed like his life was gradually getting on track. But on June 7, 1960, due to his resentment towards his high school, he, in an act of revenge, coerced a 16-year-old bakery employee to set a fire with him, burning down the high school's bus garage. This not only cost him his job, but also earned him 3 years in prison. This infuriated his wife of only 6 months. Crucially, during his imprisonment, doctors diagnosed Hansen with manic depressive disorder. This made his wife feel she couldn't go on, and she chose to divorce him. After serving 20 months in prison obediently, Hansen was released on parole. With no income, he didn't think about finding an honest job. Instead, he relied on petty theft to get by. He even enjoyed the thrill of stealing. During this period, he was frequently in and out of jail for multiple thefts. He lived aimlessly like this for 3 years, until he met his second wife. This time, he decided to turn over a new leaf. He and his wife moved thousands of miles away to Anchorage to start a new life. Upon arriving in the new city, Hansen really seemed to have changed. He had 2 children with his wife and planned to open a bakery. But he had no funds, so Hansen came up with a crooked idea. He had collected some trophies and some game from hunting. He bought a high-value insurance policy for them, then faked a burglary, and fraudulently collected a $13,000 insurance payout. He then successfully opened his shop. Perhaps he inherited his father's skills. Besides hunting, his baking skills were also excellent, so the bakery business flourished. Over the years, he made a good fortune. He even bought a private plane, even though he didn't have a pilot's license. His neighbors also liked him. This seemingly mild-mannered man possessed superb hunting skills. He had broken the local bow hunting record 4 times, taking down Dall sheep and grizzly bears. He was known as a master marksman. An entire wall in his home was covered with trophies and game from hunting competitions. Anchorage's mountainous terrain, temperate rainforests, and abundant wildlife allowed Hansen to fully unleash his hunting talents. However, what his neighbors didn't know was that Dall sheep, grizzly bear, and moose could no longer satisfy this respected marksman. The state of Alaska has rich oil and natural gas reserves. In the 1970s, the government built a 300-mile oil pipeline. While transporting the abundant energy out, it also brought in a large number of sex workers, pimps, and drug dealers. Anchorage had a notorious red light district. Newsstands sold obscene materials, and bars in downtown areas were filled with countless sex workers. And adult shows. They gathered to party and have fun. It was, suffice to say, quite chaotic. Here, Hansen found the prey he wanted. For $300, he could get a dolled-up woman to go with him. Bystanders were used to it. Nobody questioned why a sex worker, after getting into a man's car, was never seen again. On September 12, 1982, 2 off-duty police officers were hunting on the Neck River. However, their luck was bad. It was almost dark, and they still had nothing. Disappointed, the 2 decided to pack up and go home. Just as they were heading up the riverbank, they unexpectedly found a pair of boots in a sandbar. For the 2 of them, being police officers, this was highly unusual. They exchanged a look and walked closer to see. What appeared before them were decomposed human remains buried in the sand. Police immediately dispatched investigators to the scene. A veteran who had served in the Vietnam War was responsible for investigating the scene. After several hours of searching, he found a .223 caliber shell casing. He was very familiar with this type of ammunition, commonly used in high-powered rifles like the M16, Mini 14, or AR-15. It was clear the victim had likely been shot. Preliminary findings showed the victim was a female, age unknown, and had been dead for over 6 months. There were 3 gunshot wounds. It took the police more than 2 weeks, but they finally identified the deceased as 24-year-old Sherry Morrow. She was a stripper at the Wild Cherry Bar. She was last seen on November 17, 1981. According to friends, that day, a man offered her $300 to pose for a photo shoot. This was a significant sum for Sherry, but after that, no one ever saw her again. Sherry's murder led police to suspect this was not an isolated homicide. Over the past 2 years, the number of missing person reports had risen sharply. The majority of them were strippers and sex workers. Before Sherry was found, the missing person reports hadn't drawn much attention because the movements of sex workers were already hard to track. They often kept to themselves, occasionally disappearing and reappearing when they needed money, which was common. Police immediately linked Sherry's death to 2 previous cases. On July 17, 1980, construction workers were digging and unearthed the partial remains of a woman. The cause of death was a stab wound to the back. The killer had fled with most of the remains, leaving almost no evidence at the scene. The victim's identity could not be determined. That same year, police, in a gravel pit, discovered another set of remains. Like the one before, the body was severely decomposed, and no evidence was found. The victim was later identified as a local stripper, Joanne Messina. Although the 3 cases were investigated together, unfortunately, police found no useful leads in any of the 3 cases. Months passed, and there was still no progress. The hope of solving the cases was very slim. However, a breakthrough occurred on the night of June 13, 1983. A girl, almost completely naked, appeared on 6th Avenue. She was acting strangely. Her hands were cuffed, and she was running barefoot down the street. There weren't many people on the street. Passers-by paid her no mind, assuming she was just another addict high on drugs. The girl was frantically shouting in the street, almost hysterical. It wasn't until she flagged down a truck that she finally got help. After getting in the truck, whether from the cold or extreme fear, she was trembling and could barely speak a complete sentence. She haltingly described that she was being chased by a man and begged the driver to take her to a nearby motel. The kind driver did so, but afterward, the more he thought about it, the more something felt wrong. A strange woman, wearing almost nothing and wearing handcuffs. Who knew if she was a fugitive? To be safe, the driver chose to call the police. When the police arrived, the girl was alone in the motel room. Still wearing the handcuffs, police verified her identity, unlocked the cuffs for her, and took her to the station for questioning. The girl said her name was Cindy Paulson, and she was only 17. She had been living on the streets since running away from home at 12, and had gotten into drugs. She had to turn to sex work to survive. Later, she started working at an adult club. She said that on the night of June 12th, a man named Hansen approached her, promising her $200 in exchange for her services. Cindy saw the man wore glasses and looked very mild-mannered, not like a dangerous person, so she readily agreed. In a deserted corner, Hansen stopped the car to proceed with the transaction. As Cindy was fumbling in the dark, suddenly, a pair of shiny handcuffs snapped onto her wrist. She screamed in terror. The man tightly covered her mouth and then pulled out a handgun, pressing it to her head. He said, "I just have some special kinks. As long as you cooperate, I definitely won't hurt you." Cindy couldn't break free and could only agree. The car drove through the darkness, arriving at a remote house. Cindy recognized it as being in Anchorage's well-known wealthy neighborhood. She was dragged into the basement. The room was filled with terrifying bear and deer heads. and many animal skeletons. A chain hung from the ceiling in the middle of the room. Cindy was suspended there and tortured all night. Hansen bit her chest until it bled and even shoved a hammer into her vagina. By morning, Cindy had nearly passed out, but Hansen was still full of energy. He planned to fly his plane to take Cindy to his cabin in the woods. To continue his game, he promised that if she behaved well, he would let her go. Just like that, Hansen hid the naked Cindy in the backseat of his car and drove to the nearby Merrill Field airstrip. Hansen parked the car not far from the airport. He left Cindy alone in the car while he got out to load necessary supplies into the plane. Blocked by the car seat, Cindy was just out of Hansen's line of sight. Cindy's mind raced. She realized this was an excellent opportunity. If she really went to Hansen's cabin, she was certain she wouldn't make it out alive. Thinking this, she ignored the pain in her body, opened the car door, left her shoes in the car as evidence, and then ran with all her might. After sprinting and nearing escape, she finally encountered the kind truck driver. Cindy demanded the police accompany her to the airport to identify the plane. The police felt they should take her to the hospital first. Besides, even if there was a plane, the suspect wouldn't have left it at the scene. But at Cindy's insistence, the police agreed. Sure enough, when they arrived at the airport, they didn't see the plane. However, the car Cindy mentioned was still there. By checking the registration, the car owner was Robert Hansen of Old Harbor Road, and he did indeed own a small Piper aircraft. Police immediately went to Hansen's home, but when confronted with Cindy's accusations, Hansen showed no fear. He even flew into a rage, saying he had engaged in a transaction with Cindy before, but that was all. As for the kidnapping Cindy described, he knew nothing about it. The reason Cindy was framing him was purely because she had failed to extort a higher payment from him and was now retaliating by framing him. At the same time, Hansen's friends also provided an alibi for him, stating that from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. on the night of June 12th, they were together repairing the plane's seats. Afterward, they went to another friend's house and stayed together until 5 a.m. the next morning, then took the seats to the airport to install them. So Hansen had a perfect alibi. Facing police interrogation, Hansen appeared calm and forthright. To prove his innocence, he even allowed police, who had no search warrant, to search his house. Although Hansen's basement was very similar to Cindy's description, and police did find some hunting rifles and handguns. For a hunting enthusiast like Hansen, keeping legal hunting firearms at home was perfectly normal. Furthermore, the shoes Cindy mentioned were not found in the car. On one side was a refined-looking baker. On the other, a sex worker who was likely high on drugs. For a moment, the police couldn't rule out the possibility that Cindy was lying. The situation was indeed difficult. On September 2nd, 1983, another body was found along the banks of the Kanik River, buried in a shallow grave. The body was already partially decomposed. The autopsy showed she had been shot with a .223 caliber bullet. By this time, multiple homicides had occurred in the area, but the cases remained unsolved. The Anchorage police were losing face. They had no choice but to seek help from the FBI. The FBI sent a legend in law enforcement, Agent John Douglas. John had a considerable reputation in criminal profiling and modern criminal investigative techniques. He had a particularly strong understanding of criminal psychology. After reviewing the Alaska serial murder cases, he immediately determined the killer was an accomplished hunter. His targets were sex workers and strippers. Because this group of people interacts with a dense and complex clientele, and most are just passing through, their disappearances usually don't attract much attention. At this time, the Anchorage police still believed Hansen was a strong suspect. At their urging, John began to investigate Hansen. He noted that Hansen was short. His face was pockmarked, and he had a severe stutter. From this, he inferred that Hansen had severe skin problems as a teenager and was likely ridiculed by his peers, leading to his extreme insecurity. That's why he chose to live in a remote area. He analyzed that abusing sex workers was the killer's way of taking revenge on women. He likely had other outlets for his rage. Several officers familiar with Hansen said he had some fame in the area. He had once killed a wild Dall sheep with a crossbow and was called a master marksman. Based on this clue, John made a bold deduction. Hansen had probably grown tired of hunting moose, bears, and bighorn sheep, and had turned his attention to more interesting prey: humans. John's analysis was indeed very accurate. Finally, John raised a key point. People like this usually have a collection fetish. If Hansen was the killer, he would definitely keep souvenirs from his murders, just as he collected animal trophies. Since Hansen was a strong suspect, how did he get his perfect alibi? After much thought, there was only one possibility. His two friends had both lied. They had committed perjury. The state trooper in charge decided to bluff them. He brought the two men to the station and told them they'd face jail time if they didn't tell the truth. This threat worked, and both men told the truth. On the night Cindy was kidnapped, they were not with Hansen. The police immediately split into two teams. One went to arrest Hansen, the other went to search Hansen's house in Plain. This time, an officer accidentally discovered a hidden room within the attic of Hansen's home. Inside was a Remington rifle, a Thompson handgun, a Winchester 12-gauge shotgun, and a map marked with 37 small X's. Some of the marked locations coincided with the burial sites of the victims police had previously found. There was also various jewelry and ID cards, some of which belonged to the deceased women. Most importantly, police found a .223 caliber rifle. Many of the previous victims had been killed by bullets of this caliber. On November 3, 1983, based on the evidence found, an Anchorage grand jury indicted Hansen on 4 charges: assault and kidnapping, use of multiple deadly weapons, theft, and insurance fraud. But Hansen pleaded not guilty to all charges. On November 20th, the ballistics test results came back. The FBI crime lab confirmed that the bullets from several victims were all fired from Hansen's rifle. Facing ironclad proof, Hansen realized his chances of winning in court were slim, but he still refused to plead guilty. In response, the Anchorage prosecutor came up with a plan. He offered Hansen a plea deal. If he gave a full confession of all his crimes, he would only be charged with the 4 homicides police had currently found, with no mention of the other cases. He would also be allowed to serve his time in a federal prison rather than a maximum security state prison. Under these tempting conditions, Hansen finally, reluctantly, began to talk. Hansen confessed that whenever he captured a victim, he would take her on his plane and fly her to his remote cabin. After brutally torturing them, he would strip them naked. Sometimes he would blindfold them and release them into the woods. Pretending to let them go, Hansen would stand back and enjoy their desperate, panicked attempts to flee. Finally, like toying with a panicked Dall sheep, he would end their lives with a hunting knife or rifle. Her feet were cut up by the rocks. In the end, she tried to hide under a bush, but I found her. She screamed and ran out. And then I raised my gun. This was so much more exciting than chasing a grizzly bear. This was Hansen's description of his victims. After killing them, Hansen would occasionally feel a sudden burst of kindness and bury them, then mark the grave on his map. Soon, his map was covered with dozens of red marks, large and small. In his spare time, he would admire it like a trophy, unfolding the map to savor the memories and plan his next target. Police prepared to fly with Hansen to each location to confirm the victims' burial sites. The next day, under police escort, Hansen was taken to Anchorage International Airport. Hansen first led police along the Kinnick River, then flew east to the Jim River, then west towards the Susitna River. Finally, he stopped over Horseshoe Lake and Figure 8 Lake to the south. In winter, Anchorage is covered in ice and snow. Who would have known that beneath the frozen ground lay the remains of so many innocent women? Following Hansen's directions, police excavated 17 grave sites, finding the remains of at least 12 victims. On February 18, 1984, Hansen pled guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and confessed to 13 other murders and 30 sexual assaults. It's hard to imagine, if not for Cindy's lucky escape, perhaps Hansen's atrocities would still be hidden beneath the ice and snow. This case had a huge impact. Later, his real crimes were adapted into several films and television shows. As there was no death penalty, the Superior Court ultimately sentenced Hansen to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He was first incarcerated in a prison in Pennsylvania, then transferred to a prison in Alaska. Later, due to health problems, Hansen was moved to the Anchorage Correctional Complex in 2014. On August 21, 2014, Hansen's condition worsened, and he died in an Anchorage hospital. He was 75 years old. Alright, that's the story for this episode. Please like, share, and subscribe to show your support. It's a huge encouragement for me. This is DarkCaseX. See you next time.